Hey there, class. It is Faisal coming at you with your video for May 21st. Thank you all for coming to the seminar yesterday, right? That was a nice meeting. It's always nice to hear from you all in person. So today we're going to be talking about our next short story, which I'll do in a second. But first, a couple of things. A lot of you had questions about the short answers, and I thought it would be good to do a quick example here. So let me just go through one real fast. So this is for the Maiden Wiser Than the Tsar. It's a teacher question, right? Not your question. It's slightly different. But let's take a look here. So my question here is, does the maiden genuinely love the Tsar, or is she just after... Oh, that should be his money. Okay, that's my question there, right? So, my answer to that question goes like this. The maiden absolutely cannot genuinely be in love with the Tsar, or Tsar. This man is This is a man who has threatened to torture and murder her father for no real reason. He also apparently argues with her and has kicked her out of the house. The only reason that the maiden has to be with this man is because she is after his money and position. Because if you take those away, you are only left with an arrogant and violent man who likes to throw his weight around. So, what I'm trying to do in this answer is basically four things. All right, let me get that right over here. I want to have a clear position, or a clear answer, I should say, to the question, right? So my first sentence here: the maiden absolutely cannot genuinely be in love with the Tsar, right? That is expressing an opinion. It's making my position very clear. I never want to read an answer where I'm not sure what your answer is, right? You need to take a position. So, going on. This is a man who has threatened to torture and murder her father for no reason, right? And all of that stuff. That's my examples and evidence from the text. Now, you don't have to quote the text, right? You can if you want, but I do need examples and evidence that's backing you up, right? And it needs to make sense. There has to be a logic to it, right? Over here, when I'm saying the only reason that the maiden has to be with this man is because she is after his money and position, right? I'm trying to present my logic here, and make it so that you understand why it is I am saying what I am saying, right? So that needs to make sense. And the other thing I'm looking for is clear sentences with no spelling or grammar mistakes, right? So if there are mistakes all throughout your passage there, then, well, I can't really give you a 5 out of 5 if there are mistakes, right? Because a mistake is a mistake. All right, so that's what I'm looking for when it comes to these reflections, right? And that's what I want you guys to attempt to do, right? This answer here is about 4 sentences long, and, that's totally sufficient. Now, quick note about timing, right? A lot of you are saying, hey, I can't hand in all these questions on time, right? Because I had something to do during the day or whatnot. Do note, first of all, I'm not taking late marks. Don't worry about that. Next Tuesday is going to be the last day for giving me the short answers for each of these stories, right? So if you haven't got, the flying machine question done, you have until next Tuesday to do it, right? Right now I'm assigning one per day, right? And I'm marking them all each day, right? So, that's how I'm doing it. But, I'm going to be assigning a new question today, and I'm going to be assigning a new question on Monday, right? And what that means for you guys is that there are going to be 4 in all, and then on Tuesday, they're all going to be done, right? And that's sort of the absolute deadline for all of them. So it's in your best interest. I'm going to say this again and again to make sure that you don't fall behind, right? To make sure that you are getting these things done in good time and everything like that. Okay, so don't fall behind. Now then, let's get to our next story. So, the next story is a little different from the other 2 that we have done so far. Think of the other 2 as sort of just getting a taste of what I'm looking for when it comes to short stories. But this next one is a little different, and I've put the PDF of this in this post so that you can just click and hopefully just read it. So this is called The Adventure of the Three Students. It is by a man called Arthur Conan Doyle, and it is a mystery story about a man called Sherlock Holmes. So some of you might remember from the intro to the class that the novel we're going to be reading in June, probably starting next week even, is going to be a Sherlock Holmes novel. And it is that novel that the final exam and everything is going to be based on. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, uh, he made a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories. Most of them are short stories, actually. Uh, and the novel is sort of just the big version of that. So I figured it's good to have you guys read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's writing before we get to the novel, just so you get used to it and you get to know, okay, who is the Sherlock Holmes guy and what's he all about. So, these stories were written in the late 19th and early 20th century, and they are about a detective living in England named Sherlock Holmes. And in terms of their influence and everything like that, these are very, very famous stories, right? Some of you may have heard or perhaps even watched the BBC series Sherlock, right? Which came out a couple of years ago, I guess. It has 3 seasons or 4 seasons, something like that. Which is based on Sherlock Holmes. There are 2 movies out there that star Robert Downey Jr. That are about Sherlock Holmes. So he's a very famous character, but he got his start from the stories being written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in the early 20th century. And those stories were about this detective living in England who works around the country. He doesn't work for the police, but rather gets hired privately, or sometimes the police come to him because they don't know how to solve a mystery, and they come over to him and ask for help, right? And, you've probably heard of the phrase like elementary, my dear Watson, right? You might have heard that phrase before, right? Or the game is afoot. That's all from Sherlock Holmes. So I'll be honest, there are a tremendous bunch of short stories that I personally love, right? I love these stories so much. It's one of my favorite sets, and I'm kind of happy to be teaching them. So, yeah, they are very much, close to my heart, I guess. But I hope you guys will enjoy them too. So the thing is that this guy Sherlock Holmes, he's a genius. But all of his stories are not told through him, right? They're told through his friend John Watson, right? Dr. Watson, his main characteristic is that he's really dumb, right, and doesn't know what's going on. So Dr. Watson tells the story, right, and he's the one sort of watching Sherlock Holmes uh, do things, right? But it's Sherlock Holmes who's actually solving the cases, right? And the stories are kind of timeless. They're very, for the most part, entertaining and great. And what I always tell um, students is that these are stories that you should get if you have kids, get them to read them, right? Because they're great stories. They work with children, and it'll get your kids to be smart. So it's a good idea, and you guys can be smarter too. So we're gonna take 2 days for this one, right? As in, you guys will not have a new story today. It's just going to be this story for both today and tomorrow, right? So we're going to take our time with this one because it is a little bit longer than the other ones, right? Let's see. It's about 8 pages all told. So this one's a little bit longer, so we're going to take 2 days to read it, right? But it's a very good story. Let me get you guys started. Let's dive right in here. on the first page of the story, just at the beginning there, let's take a look. It was in the year 95 that a combination of events, into which I need not enter, caused Mr. Sherlock Holmes and myself to spend some weeks in one of our great university towns. And it was during this time that the small but instructive adventure which I am about to relate befell us. It will be obvious that any details which would help the reader to exactly identify the college or the criminal would be injudicious and offensive. So painful a scandal may well be allowed to die out. But with due discretion, the incident itself may, however, be described, since it serves to illustrate some of those qualities for which my friend was remarkable. I will endeavor in my statement to avoid such terms as would serve to limit the event to any particular place or give a clue as to the people concerned. So, this is Dr. Watson talking, right? When he says I, right? That's Dr. Watson. And 95, by the way, would be 1895. So what you'll notice is that the story begins with Dr. Watson talking about, oh, I don't want to name the college or the criminal, right? I want to protect their privacy and everything like that. Which brings a funny thing about this story out, because when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was writing them for the first time, a lot of people were really convinced that Sherlock Holmes was a real person, right? And in fact, people would send letters to his house, which was on Baker Street in London, right? People would write him letters. Dear Sherlock Holmes, I need help with this and this and this. And the reason why people thought that is because of the way it's written, right? Where it's written as if, it is real and this is a real person who has to consider privacy and scandals and everything like that, right? So that's sort of one of the funny things about Sherlock Holmes, is that a lot of his readers at the time thought this was a real story and that Sherlock Holmes was a real guy. Anyway, let's go a little further here. We were residing at the time in furnished lodgings close to a library where Sherlock Holmes was pursuing some laborious researches in early English charters. Researches which led to results so striking that they may be the subject of one of my future narratives. Here it was that one evening we received a visit from an acquaintance, Mr. Hilton Soames, tutor and lecturer at the College of St. Luke's. Mr. Soames was a tall, spare man of a nervous and excitable temperament. I had always known him to be restless in his manner, but on this particular occasion he was in such a state of uncontrollable agitation that it was clear something very unusual had occurred. I trust, Mr. Holmes, that you can spare me a few hours of your valuable time. We have had a very painful incident at St. Luke's, and really, but for the happy chance of your being in town, I should have been at a loss of what to do. I'm very busy just now, and I desire no distractions, my friend answered. I should much prefer that you call in the aid of the police. No, no, my dear sir, such a course is utterly impossible. When once the law is evoked, it cannot be stayed again, and this is just one of those cases where, for the credit of the college, it is most essential to avoid scandal. Your discretion is as well known as your powers, and you are the one man in the world who can help me. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, to do what you can. So this is how Sherlock Holmes stories go down, right? Holmes will be doing something else, and someone will come to him with a problem and ask him to help solve it, right? And he will only really be interested in cases that are of interest to him, right? He only likes good cases, interesting cases to solve, right? So that is one of his characteristics for sure. Let's see. My friend's temper had not improved since he had been deprived of the congenial surroundings of Baker Street. Without his scrapbooks, his chemicals, and his homely untidiness, he was an uncomfortable man. He shrugged his shoulders in ungracious acquiescence, while our visitors' hurried words and much excitable gesticulation poured forth from his story. So you might notice some words in here that you don't understand, because there are words that you may not see every day, but I think it's a fairly readable story nevertheless. If you were wondering, the word gesticulation is when you do a lot of things with your hands, right? You know, sort of, you never meet a hand talker, someone who's always like going like this, like, I think we should do this, right? That's how this guy talks. So I'm just gonna read how much would it take to explain the mystery? I'll just read another paragraph, and then the rest is up to you guys. I must explain to you, Mr. Holmes, that tomorrow is the first day of the examination for the Fortescue Scholarship. I am one of the examiners, my subject is Greek, and the first of the papers consists of a large passage of Greek translation, which the candidate has not seen. This passage is printed on the examination paper, and it would naturally be an immense advantage if a candidate could prepare it in advance. For this reason, great care is taken to keep the paper secret. So, this story is about a school, right? Appropriately enough, and it's about a cheating incident in this particular school, right? So, what you're going to see is that, well, there are 3 students. One of them has broken into this guy's office and taken a look at his test papers before the test, but he doesn't know which one it is. So, what I want you guys to do for now is read this story. Now, note one thing when you read this. This is taking place in the 19th century, right? 1895. It is a time when technology is not so advanced as it is now. So, for instance, a pencil. You at that time would have to sharpen a pencil with a knife, right? Not with a pencil sharpener, because those have not been invented, right? So, if you wanted to sharpen your pencil, you'd have to do it like that. So you'll notice that Sherlock Holmes will talk about cutting a pencil, right? And that's why, because there were no pencil sharpeners in 1895. So keep that in mind. That's kind of important for understanding the story. Anyway, I'm going to give you guys 2 days for this, but I am going to tell you the question now, right? Tomorrow, I'll post another video where I'll talk a little bit more about Sherlock Holmes and answer any questions that you might have. But for now, the question is, explain how Sherlock Holmes solves this case. What is his method, and how does he figure it out? So, I don't want you to go through every single detail here, right? So, let me even put that here. This is not a summary, right? But rather, I want you to show me what is his method. How is he figuring this stuff out? What is he doing, right? So don't just tell me, oh, first Sherlock Holmes talks to this guy, then Sherlock Holmes looks at this. That's not what I want, right? I want you to tell me how does he do that, right? What's his methodology, right? What's sort of special about him? It's important to understand how Sherlock Holmes solves cases because, again, we've got a whole novel of Sherlock Holmes coming up, right? And knowing what his method is pretty important. So, guys, I do hope you like the story. And from me and the cats, I hope you guys are all having a good day. Meow. Good luck solving the mystery. Meow.